So, can I ask a question here? You
Yes.
make a really, really valid and important, vital point, which is uh, make focus on the individual and make it intentional. Enable them to respond and adapt to the change rather than focusing or rather than spotlighting the technology so much. So, which means that uh, would I be right in saying or thinking that L&D need not wait for business or the organization to really adopt generative AI and then wait for them to figure out what the gaps are, because the focus is on the individual, which is where L&D should always be focusing on. Is would that be a correct or a close
Yeah,
to correct
yeah.
inference?
Well, yes and no. So this brings us
Mhm.
to another dimension, right? So the first, I mean, this dimension we're talking about is in the context of an organization.
Mm.
So in the context of an organization, you've got additional constraints, which typically that's actually what defines the job in the sense that, there are certain rules, there are certain affordances in the environment that you need to leverage. So the first obvious one is whether you have access to generative AI tools in your organization, as in if you've been allowed to use it, because
Mhm.
some organizations ban it, or you need to have some, the privacy issues, whatever. I'm talking about generative AI specifically. So
Right.
the first is, do you have access to it in the organization? Because if you don't, then within the context of the organization, there's really not much that the L&D team can do with regards to helping you use it to improve, knowing how to use it, because you don't have access to it.
Mm.
Um, uh, Again, I'm talking about the construct of the L&D role, L&D function within an organization.
Mhm.
If it has been made available, again, in the context of an organization, it is important to understand how it has been made available, because available makes it almost impossible to use it the way it's supposed to be used, and then like there's no point. So the L&D team have to really understand, again, in the context of what we said earlier, they need to understand the rules and the policies around the availability of the tool, and then using that context to address what we said earlier in terms of how, therefore, would the average employee use it, to improve their productivity and performance. So that's the second. You need to because you're working within an organization, so you need to understand um, the affordances, the configurations of that tool within that organization, and then build your proposition around those realities. Obviously, you can influence as much as possible the way the tool is deployed, but that's a separate activity and a separate agenda. But regardless of how the tool is deployed, the team that's trying to enable performance through the tool needs to understand the restrictions or the constraints and operate within those constraints. The third variable is actually who's using the tool. So the earlier example I shared was more a general view of individuals, just anybody across the organization. But you do have certain pockets of people who are using the tool in more specific ways, if I can call it that. For example, people in technology, or people in disciplines that are more tech related, if I can call it, are more uh, connected to
Specific
the
use.
more connected to the technology in the generative AI space
Mhm.
itself. So they have a different their use of it is a little bit different, because, for example, developing and packaging and whatever the tool is a goal.
Mm. Yeah.
Creating solutions with the tool is a goal, rather than using the tool to enable performance. Is using the tool to create things that enable performance. So they have a different view of that tool, and L&D
Mm.
support of those people can be interesting. I mean, I've had certain conversations with certain organizations where some of these users are trying very hard to understand the tool so they can figure out how to do what I just said. That means build solutions that help the organization be more productive, either individuals or just the system itself, like AI powered cybersecurity tools, or AI powered risk management tools, or like they want to integrate the technology
Mhm.
into their tools, or they want to build bots or whatever to help users of their framework be better. Now, they need to understand the tool from a different point of view, almost like a hard skill, rather than the previous example, which was more of a soft skill in terms of the tool as an enabler of self. Rather,
Mhm.
now this is the tool as a technical skill. So again, we need to differentiate those users in terms of how you support them, and that's a very different requirement, but that's a hard skill. It falls under the umbrella of a hard skill requirement. How do you
Hmm.
get them to connect with the possibilities? How do you help them frame their requirements? And then how do you help them develop the skills to actually build those solutions? And that's just the way the L&D team needs to review this. Interestingly, across both use cases, including the fact that the technology configuration is by an individual that the L&D has
Hmm.
impact on. If you think about it from that recursive way,
Hmm.
um, the the one of the critical uh, element is how do you raise the awareness and the understanding of the tool so that decision makers are able to make the right decisions regardless.
Right.